Well, I was born in Chehalis, Washington. At the time, my parents actually lived in a logging camp in out of South Bend, Washington. I don't remember too many details about it at the time I was born, but we uh, we left South Bend when I was 4 years old. Supposedly, we were going to move back to my dad's home in hometown, I guess I should say, in Minnesota. We spent about a month or two there and loaded everything back up and came back to Washington. Arriving here in the fall of 1929, right at the start of the crash, we wound up in a little logging town in East Lewis County called Randall. While we lived about 2 or 3 miles out of Randall. I guess you could say I was kind of raised in the woods, with between my brother, who was 2 years older than me, and my cousin, who was about a year younger. I think we probably traveled or hiked every trail in Lewis County just to see what was on the other side of the mountain. From the time I was 12, 13 years old, we roamed the woods, and then in 1942, when I was 17 years old, I worked one summer for the Forest Service on a firefighting crew. And then I spent about the last 2 or 3 weeks of that on a fire lookout. In the fall of 1942, at 17 years old, I enlisted in the Navy. My dad was killed in a logging accident the same day I was sworn in the Navy, and so while he was after he was killed and I was in the Navy, my mother went to work in the Bremerton Navy Yard all during the war. Went through boot camp in Farragut, Idaho. My first ship was, after I got out of boot camp, I went aboard a light cruiser named the Milwaukee, operating out of Recife, Brazil, escorting convoys across the Atlantic. In a kind of I guess you could say it was a foul-up. They was doing some kind of battle maneuvers, and the light cruiser Omaha broadsided the cruiser I was on, did extensive damage, wound up going back to Brooklyn Navy Yards for repairs. While I was in for repairs, along with others, I got transferred off the cruiser, went down to Key West, Florida, boarded they called them a PC boat. That's what it was, a submarine chaser. We was escorting convoys between New York and Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. When I left we wound up in the South Pacific on that subchaser, operating out of a little island that was close to Guadalcanal. When I transferred off the PC boat, I came back and wound up going to landing craft training school. Come out of that as a skipper of landing craft. It was a LCVP, which stood for Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. I was also qualified to operate LCMs. After the operation at Iwo Jima, we came back for resupply and so forth. And I wound up being transferred off of it into shore duty down in the South Pacific. Spent time at American Samoa, Suva, Fiji, Esprit de Santos, and New Hebrides. I spent some time on an island called Funafuti. It was in the Ellis Group. Well, when I came back from there, I came back for discharge at the Bremerton Navy Yard. And I was discharged on a Friday night, and I took my mother to a dance at a ballroom that was outside of Bremerton. And there's where I met the lady that eventually became my wife. Of course, we had quite a long courtship. I think we were married about a month after we got acquainted. I spent some time working in a naval torpedo station in Washington. In 49, I guess it would have been 1949. Got out of work in Bremerton, wound up back up in my old hometown of Randall. Drove log truck for a couple of years, a couple of seasons. Wound up in 1950 going to work on the Bremerton Police Department. I worked there for 4 years. Got tired of having to work 2 jobs in order to make ends meet. Well, when I went on the Bremerton Police Department, the starting pay was $295 a month, which wasn't, even in those days, wasn't a lot of money to support a family. In 1955, I had an opportunity to go to work with the Alaska Territorial Police. That was 4 years before it became a state. So we moved lock and stock and barrel up to Anchorage, Alaska. I was there for 4 years. Worked while they were there for 3 or 4 years on routine patrol. Oh, I might add that at that time there was 40 of us on the Territorial Police. Up prior to statehood, the U.S. Marshal's Office was the primary law enforcement in Alaska, and they had officers stationed in a lot of the larger villages. When the Statehood Act was signed, the U.S. Marshal's Office just packed their ditty bag and said, "It's yours." So that left approximately 40 of us policing an area 1/5 the size of the United States. Needless to say, we didn't spend much time at home. With the Territorial Police and the state troopers, there are no sheriff's offices in Alaska. Everything outside of the incorporated cities is the responsibility of the state troopers, at that time the Territorial Police. So we never knew when we went to work in the morning when we were going to be coming back home. So my wife, Dorothy, wound up practically raising our 3 sons during my absence. I was in Fairbanks then for 2 years. But during that 2 years I was stationed in Fairbanks, I was an investigator, assigned to working liquor violations, gambling, so forth, and investigating any major crimes, and then transferred to Ketchikan, and where my sons got most of their schooling. From Ketchikan, I was transferred up to Juneau. I made sergeant and was transferred up to Juneau as the deputy commander of the region. I was only there for a year when I was promoted to lieutenant and transferred back to Anchorage. At Anchorage, my first assignment there, I was called a patrol commander. After about, I would have been a year or 2 in Anchorage, the department had a federal grant under the Law Enforcement Assistance Act to train village police officers. But they weren't. We weren't training them to be state troopers. They were being trained to look after things until the trooper could get there. Part of that program was after they'd been taken to our academy in Sitka for school training. Part of the program was to visit their village as often as possible, to get together with them, the problems they'd had, and so forth. And there again, I'm kind of regressing. I neglected to mention, as quick as I got out of the Navy, I took up flight training under the GI Bill. At that time, I got a commercial pilot's license, a flight instructor rating, multi-engine license. Then after I got up in Alaska, I was working part-time for different flight services up there when I wasn't working on the troopers. I wanted to get a seaplane rating and an instrument rating. What I'm leading up to is that I turned that program of visiting those villages. I finally got an okay from the director in the public safety to do my own flying. I had an agreement with. We didn't have our own airplanes. I had an agreement with with 3 or 4 flight services there at Anchorage where I could rent whatever I needed in the way of aircraft, whether it was light twins or seaplanes or wheel skis and so forth. I was designated at that time. He designated me as being the chief pilot, he called it, and told me that nobody else would be allowed to fly for the department unless I checked them out and approved them. In 1975, I retired from the troopers. We bought a 65-foot yacht and started chartering with it out of Ketchikan. Most of our charters, of course, were with corporations that were chartering us to wine and dine business associates and so forth. We did that for 11 years. Sold the business, packed up, and moved to where we are now, or where I am now. 43 years of smoking caught up with my wife in 2000, October 2000. So I've been pretty much living alone now for 13 years. I guess that gives kind of a general rundown of my. Might fill in more later.